Welcome to the second session of our MOOC concerning learning and assessment. First of all, let's have a recap of what we have done before in part 1. We have been dealing with traditional assessment and the obsession that the system has been developing with quizzes. Second, we have been dealing with the time spent of preparing for quizzes, not just on the side of the teachers, but also on the side of the learner. Third, we have been introducing and dealing with the advantages of formative assessment. Now, from formative assessment, we will also include self-reflective assessment. What does diagnostic assessment actually mean? Imagine when you go to the doctor and he gives you a diagnosis. In other words, he actually presupposes how you are feeling and he's trying to give you a cure, he's trying to give you a solution, and he's trying to determine at what you're at. Upon starting the learning experience, that's pretty much exactly the same. Teachers determine the entry level of their students. They determine what they know how to do, they determine what they are close to know, and they determine what is very far away from their experience. From there, the teachers can actually work toward a personal learning curve because, let's face it, not every student that we have in class is exactly the same as the other. So employing a measure that one fits all, it's an approach that is sometimes used, but that should be differentiated. So, for instance, somebody may have an understanding of what a word is, and somebody else may not because he's an illiterate person. Somebody, on the other hand, may have an understanding of other scripts, not just the Latin script, but it could be also the Coptic script, or the Cyrillic script, or the Arabic script. But if we don't know that, we don't know where our learners do begin. And in that case, it's very important to know that they first need to make the transition from their own script to the Latin script, and then maybe even understanding what is a word all about. And from there, we can actually start understanding where they're at. But last but not least, not all the students who may be very literate or highly literate are literate digitally speaking. We have many technophobic students, students that know what is a screen, know what is a computer, know what is a mouse, but they never use it for the purpose of learning. So, how do we combine the use of a PC or of a laptop or of a mobile phone, for instance, with learning a second language, with learning a new script, with learning what a word is all about? And if we don't know all this, one of the things that come and help us is diagnostic assessment. So there you are. We're at a point in which, of course, diagnostic assessment can come in handy in order to understand where do our students start and where do our students go to. Look at this page, for instance, for a moment. What do we see there? It seems a little bit of a bloodshed, doesn't it? We have words like bad, repeated twice, we have plenty of crosses, we have comments like lazy, and we have comments like you got your work totally wrong. Is this really what we want to give to our students? Of course, this is an extreme example, and of course there are always times in which we want to be thorough with our students in order to shake them awake. But what can we gain from this? And what can a student gain from it? Let's have a look instead at the advantages of formative assessment. First of all, we can start our assessment during classes. Second, we have more frequent moments of assessment rather than just coming at the very end of our learning trajectory. And through that, we can have more measurement points in which we see the improvement of each of our learners. By doing so, we have checks and time to reflect on the strengths and the weaknesses of the learner. Because, as we said before, not every learner is the same, and as we said before, every learner will be developing accordingly to a curve. Now we focus on Williams' 5 strategies to formative assessment. On the one hand, we have the teacher, the peer, and the learner. On the other hand, we have goals and aims, current level, and course of action. Please take attention to it. First of all, we need to clarify and share and understand the learner intentions and be clear as instructors about our learning intentions. Second, we need to use efficient and accessible activities that will allow us to understand where our learners are at. Third, we need to be providing valuable feedback to our learners and not simply bloodshed, crosses and a bad feeling of having missed an opportunity. Fourth, we come to learners as resources for each other, so basically use a class that is made of 20 individuals in order for them to feedback to one another. Use their capabilities, use their lacunes, use what they can do and use what they cannot do in a constructive manner. Then we come to the 5th point. The focus is mostly on the learner. Learners as owners of their own learning. Face it, our students are not tabula rasa. Our students are not blank slates. Our learners do have a previous background, do have sociolinguistic repertoire, do have literacy repertoires, even if at times they don't have digital literacy repertoires. So let's use those learners as the owners of their learning possibilities and as the owners of their learning trajectories. Yet again, we need to give them the room, the space in our classrooms in order to prepare them to be learners that move at their own space. So, well, I can imagine your faces now. Off we go. So, 2 things. When do I get time to do all this? The 5 points that we mentioned before. And second, does that actually mean that me as a teacher have always done something wrong? Well, not really. Absolutely not. It's not a critique to your practice. What we're trying to do here is to point out things that we need to be aware of. For instance, one of the things that we need to be aware of, and that in common language we actually mistake quite a bit, is the following. Errors and mistakes. I just said it, mistake. What's the difference between an error and a mistake? Well, if we take it as such, in an error we can think that a student has not yet internalized the language rules. In a mistake instead, we could think that a student knows the language rule that need to be applied. It just slipped. Second, we could say that an error is when there is a result provoked by a lack of knowledge, or by a lack of skill, or in general, by a lack of competence. In the case of a mistake instead, the result can be hastiness, fatigue, or simply lack of attention because it's not the right day. Error can also be detected in the moment in which they are constantly and persistently present in the work of our student. A mistake instead is something that may appear and may disappear in the second line. Last, students cannot self-correct, and that means that they are not aware that they are going wrong, and that is an error. Instead, a mistake is when a student can actually stop, reflect, and think, hang on a moment, I got something wrong here. So a student can actually self-correct what they just wrote or what they just said. What does this actually imply? That in the moment in which we do take care of making a difference between error and mistakes, we can also move to a criterion referenced form of assessment. Think, for instance, of a common European framework for foreign languages, nowadays also used for learners that learn a second language, not just a foreign language. What do we have there? Do we have references to mistakes, errors, things that people can't do? Or do we actually refer to the capacity, the levels, and the ability that students have to meet certain criteria? So, we are focusing on meeting criteria rather than punishing mistakes. We also focus on upward mobility. What does it mean? If a criteria has been met, then my student can actually move at the next level, from A11 to A12, all the way to, hopefully, level C, the native level or native-like level. We can also implement, by using a criterion referenced assessment, a self-reflective assessment. Ask the students to determine where they're at. Was it a mistake or was it an error? What can you actually do? Do you fulfill these conditions? In other words, do you think you are able to say, to write, to talk, to understand certain things or not? Examples. These are all examples coming from our student work and student experiences that we will analyze in our third session of this MOOC. What can we see and what did we ask to our students? Basically, we asked our students to read a text that was produced by me, and from there start understanding what this text was all about. It was a rather complex scientific text. These are the essays, short essays or longer essays that they have been producing. What do we see there? We see all sorts of things that might have been stressed with a red line. Yet again, we see different things as well. They could do with comprehension, they could have to do with spelling, or simply with a typo, or with a conjugation that went wrong, or with grammar, or with an expression that to somebody may not seem idiomatic. But what can we say now about the advantages that a criterion-based assessment has? First of all, it helps us in determining the strengths and the weaknesses of a learner. Second, there are multiple perspectives to approach the same topic. In fact, as we were carrying out our workshop, we could see that we could first of all understand whether a complex scientific text had been understood by our students. Second, whether they could sum it up. And third, whether they could use an appropriate register that was qualifying it as a scientific text. Third, we encounter, therefore, multiple ways of assessment. What does that mean? It means, for instance, that we can ask our students whether they understood the text. We can have our students to engage with one another in discussing about the text, therefore having a look at reading comprehension. We can then ask them to move on to writing and write a product that is close enough to a scientific text, but it is also divulgative enough for the people that are not in the immediacy of science. So here we come to the recap slide of what we've been doing today. First of all, we've been looking at the pros, so the positive sides of formative assessment. Second, we moved to look into criterion-referenced assessment, and we looked at how this can be beneficial for our learners. Third, we've been looking at self-reflective assessment, and we'll be looking at the implication that self-reflective assessment has for our learners as well as for ourselves. Up next, we will be looking at the way in which linguistic landscaping can be applied into our classroom. We will be looking at the way, therefore, in which ethnography, sociolinguistic, and linguistic landscaping, and through that, the learning of Dutch or of any language as a second language, can be used by us as instructors as well as by our students. We look very much forward to being with you again in the third part of our MOOC. Thank you.
you.